Good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name's Dr. Warnke, and I'm the president of the North Dakota chapter of the Society of Catholic Scientists, and we've put together a panel today of your professors to discuss whether open science is actually a good idea. So as of now, when science is done, it's expected generally that you publish your results so that others can build off of your work. And we want to see if that is actually a good idea, because that can bring a lot of progress, but also the threat of destruction. So we've got Dr. Stewart here, who will be providing a historical perspective, Dr. Sexton, who will be speaking for open science, and Dr. Boyle, who will be speaking against open science. So please give them your undivided attention.
Wonderful. I'm Dr. Joseph Stewart, Chair of History, and I teach a course here at the University of Mary called the History of Science and Medicine, which is a joy to teach every fall. And so I'm honored for the invitation. Thank you, Heather, and honored to be here with my colleagues. I just wanted to offer a few thoughts to help frame our discussion, and then I'll loop back in as we go. But the first thought comes from the British philosopher J.S. Mill in his great text on liberty from 1859. Because in this text, he is trying to protect individuality, and he's trying to limit government and social power as it affects people's ability to communicate, which I think is sort of the deeper issue at stake in open science. And he defends the freedom of speech with four main arguments. Briefly, one is that nobody's infallible. Nobody knows everything. So if we don't have freedom of speech, we are not going to be able to benefit from the full truth, because if we just limit it to certain people, then we won't hear all of the different sides. That's the first reason. No one's infallible. Second, even false opinions can contain a portion of the truth. So even when somebody says something that a lot of people know is false, often connected to their opinion are certain grains of the truth that we would miss if they did not have an open, kind of free environment. That's number two. Even false opinions can contain a portion of the truth. Three, unless a truth is rigorously contested, it's not likely to be a living truth. It's just going to kind of exist as like a habit or like a prejudice inside ourselves. Unless it's contested, it won't be really like a living idea. That's number three. And number four, interestingly, he says, unless we have freedom of speech, then truth is less likely to really connect with how we live. A full connection between what we believe and how we act engages with the heart. And this can only happen if we are able to freely adhere to it. So freedom of speech, he lays out, is really important for the development of individual personality. And the only limit that he lays out, and this will be one of the major points of debate here for sure, but the limit that Mill lays out is the harm principle, that says that free speech can only be restricted if it causes or threatens harm. Now, what is harm? Well, that's the debate, right? That's the discussion. Yeah. So people like Jefferson and others would also agree, I think, with that kind of limitation. So that's my first sort of framework that I wanted to lay out for this discussion.
Does he have any positive goods for when speech should be done? Does he say we should do speech to cause good? Like if I see someone that's, my sister, for example, once upon a time was about to walk into the street and I said, hey, look out. And then she didn't walk into the street. Am I obliged to do that? Am I obliged to speech that does good?
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good question. I guess I think he focuses more on like the benefits of doing it. So I guess by implication. Okay. Yeah. So I think that the second overall structural point I want to make is sort of a paradox in open science, which is that the openness of freedom of speech is important for the pursuit of truth, as Mill has just laid out, but it also makes truth vulnerable to misinterpretation or misuse. That's the paradox. It's really important for advancing truth, but it also can make truth vulnerable to misinterpretation and misuse. And we'll have lots of discussion about that as we get going here. And I'll just say briefly, then I'll circle back to more detail in a little bit, but that open science really begins with the Renaissance and what's called the Republic of Letters that emerges in the Renaissance and through the Enlightenment time period. So this is when scholars, whether they were scientists or philosophers or whoever, but they would exchange letters all across the continent of Europe and North America as well to share their research and to share truth and to critique each other and give ideas. And this is really the origin. So Galileo, Descartes, Boyle, Newton, all of these people exchanged letters and data and methods, forming an informal, it was called the Republic of Letters. And it was meant to be a republic in the sense that anybody, in theory at least, was welcome. It didn't matter if you were Protestant or Catholic or young or old. Anybody was welcome to participate. That was the ideal, at least. And then since then, we just have various permutations ever since. You know, in the Industrial Revolution, you have patents and open access to knowledge about the steam engine, and that Watt tries to restrict because he wants to make profit. And so the profit motive enters into open science. That we'll see that in later history too. And then all the way up through the Manhattan Project in the 40s with the atomic weapons, into the development of the COVID vaccine. These are some interesting examples of how open science has been kind of either denied, as in like, let's keep nuclear secrets secret, or promoted, as it was in the development of the COVID vaccine. So I'll stop there for now.
Okay, thanks. You want to go next?
Yeah. So I'm arguing against this idea that you should publish your results. But maybe I should briefly just say what this has gotten us. So this idea that the expectation is, if you are a good scientist, you discover something, you write it up, and you send it off to a journal, and they publish it so that anybody can read it. This is the expectation. It's been the expectation for several centuries now. And there's a sense in which this is great, right? So it means that if I want to study some problem in physics or chemistry or biology, I don't have to start from scratch and figure out every single thing about how light works myself. Instead, I can go and read what previous scientists have done. And so I gain potentially centuries worth of experimental knowledge and data. I'm starting from a better starting point. I'm going to make more progress. When I publish that better progress that I've made because of what I read, then somebody else can build off my work and so on. And so you can get this sort of exponential increase in our knowledge about the world and technology that we actually see. So we live in an incredibly healthy and wealthy society, and that is because of open science. So who could think that this was bad? Only a maniac. But I just want to give you another perspective here. So this open way of doing science is not the only way. So Dr. Stewart, you mentioned nuclear programs. So I had a good friend who studied plasma physics at Princeton, and he was doing very bomb-adjacent plasma physics, and you cannot read his dissertation. You can go read mine. I don't recommend it. I studied ants. It was not worth your time. His you cannot. It is hidden away in a government vault somewhere, and we very carefully control who has access to that. And that is like, that sort of model of like controlling who has access to results is really going to sort of slow down science. If we had been doing that for the last few centuries, we would have much fewer, much less technology, much less material prosperity. Is this a problem in the case of nuclear weapons? Is it like sad that we're holding back our ability to make the best possible fusion weapons? Probably not. Probably what we have is good enough. So this isn't the only model. And the benefits of other models of not necessarily sharing your results willy-nilly. Well, I think there's three that I'd like to talk about, and they all sort of have to do with this problem that we now have technology that can annihilate mankind. We've had that for more than 50 years. It's been at least half a century, probably 60 or 70 years, since we have had the ability to obliterate mankind completely from the face of the earth with nuclear weapons. This seems bad. There were lots of close calls in the Cold War. We can foresee lots of close calls moving forward, or not even close calls, just actual nuclear exchanges that kill everyone over Ukraine or Taiwan or things we can't yet predict. This is very bad, and it seems like it's only going to get worse as technology improves and we find new and exciting ways of obliterating all mankind. Obviously, it's sort of too late to do anything about this, but it might have been nice if we had slowed down the rate at which we developed technology. Sure, we wouldn't have cell phones or ampicillin, but we also wouldn't have the ability to kill every human on Earth and end us as a species. The other examples, or the other reasons why you might want to have closed off science is it helps with arms race dynamics. Einstein, supposedly an intelligent man, I haven't reviewed his work myself, not a physicist, but the first thing he does after he discovers that, like, in theory you could make an atomic weapon, is he writes a letter to the President of the United States saying, boys, we got to make these atomic weapons. What if the Nazis do it? Now, his source for, like, worrying about the Nazi nuclear program was literally nothing. He just made that up. He was like, well, they could have a nuclear program. They never did have a nuclear program that was going to go anywhere. This was never a realistic threat. But in response to this imagined threat, we made a whole nuclear program. Another country that did not have a nuclear program was the Soviet Union. They just stole ours. They were never going to make one on their own. If we hadn't had a nuclear program, they would not have had a nuclear program. This is an arms race dynamic, right, where that kicks off the arms race, and then for the whole Cold War, it's like neither the US nor the Soviets want to have this enormous, expensive collection of nuclear weapons, but you just have to be a little bit more strong than the other guy, and then they have to be a little bit more strong, and all of a sudden, everyone can destroy the world 10,000 times over. We see this arms race dynamic now with AI. So some of the big names in AI, Sam Altman, Elon Musk, these are people who believe that we can make a super intelligent AI, who believe that we have no way of constraining the super intelligent AI from doing evil, and that the effects of having one would be catastrophic, and yet they're still devoting billions of dollars to making a super intelligent AI because Mark Zuckerberg is doing it. And like, no one can convince Mark Zuckerberg that it's dangerous. And so if he's doing it, well, we might as well, because it would be embarrassing to be destroyed by Mark Zuckerberg's AI and maybe slightly less embarrassing to be destroyed by Elon Musk's AI. So we might as well try it. And now we're stuck in this arms race that will possibly kill us all if they succeed at it. Seems bad. But if nobody knows what the technologies are that are out there and what technologies other people have, that eliminates the arms race dynamics. And then last, like, possibly if you think about who you should share your research with, maybe you could become wise. Maybe you could not be Einstein and immediately rush to give politicians the keys to destroy the world. It would not occur to him to do anything other than this letter. I mean, it occurred to him later in his life. He deeply regretted it. But at the time, he sends off this letter because that's just what scientists do. They immediately announce their findings to everybody through this republic of letters, that no one should be excluded. A very noble sounding goal until we're all under the threat of nuclear annihilation. And so I think that having some other model, for instance, the model that we currently have with nuclear research, if not publishing it, applying that more broadly might have, had we done it in the past, left us much safer today than we are. That's all I got.
Okay. So thank you, Jack, for your commentary against open science. I have a few quotes that I'll go over. I'll just read them out and talk to you about what I'm thinking. I'm reading some things from Space Alve, and then which was by Pope Benedict, and then a longer quote from an address given by John Paul II at Nagasaki. And then I'll respond to some individual ideas from John. And of course, either of you can jump in if you have any comments on this. So my first quote from Space Alve I'm going to use to give a warning about open science. My warning is going to be careful not to view open science as a source of salvation. So even though I'm in favor of open science, I need to say what I'm not in favor of as well. That seems kind of perhaps adjacent to some people. So our quote from Spesalve says, up to that time, the recovery of what man had lost through the expulsion from paradise was expected from faith in Jesus Christ. So in the past, people thought, we've been expelled from paradise. How do we get back? How do we get redeemed? We have faith with Christ. We have union with Christ, and our redemption comes from that. And then, as you know, science is developing. Spesalve continues. Now, this redemption, or the restoration of the lost paradise, is no longer expected from faith, but from the newly discovered link between science and praxis. So the link between science and praxis is we investigate things and learn things, and then having learned things, we change our practice or our strategy of doing things. We get a good outcome, and the danger is that you will view this as the source of redemption. That if we progress enough in science, we progress enough in our technical capacity, we can build the paradise or the utopia using our powers. So when I'm advocating for open science, I'm not advocating for that because it's the route to paradise or utopia. And a lot of proponents for open science will either implicitly or explicitly say that. You're holding back science, and you're the one who's holding us back from all of these good things because you held back science. And they have this tie between science and utopia or redemption, but our redemption comes from Christ. So be careful not to view open science as a source of salvation. That's my first idea from Spesalve by Pope Benedict. Spesalve means in hope we are saved, or by hope in Christ we are saved, not by science or other things. A second quote that I'll read from Spesalve, and my goal in this one is to claim that the real threat is doing science without corresponding growth in ethical formation or the inner formation of man. And so the real thing that's dangerous is not the science, it's the lack of morality by the people practicing the science, or by the communities supporting or implementing the scientific outcomes. So that's my commentary. And here's my quote from Spesalve. If technical progress is not matched by corresponding progress in man's ethical formation, in man's inner growth, then it is not progress at all, but a threat for man and for the world. So when is technical progress a threat for man and for the world? It's a threat if we don't have corresponding ethical formation or inner growth. It's not this is my kind of overlay, it's not generically a threat. There's not plasma physics that is so dark and so evil and so secretive that only the holy priests can examine it and us commoners cannot examine it because we are not, we do not have that sacrament or something like this. I'm exaggerating. That's not the format. Everyone, I'm going to argue here, everyone has been given creation by God. God has said to everyone for us to have stewardship over creation, and part of stewardship over creation is doing plasma physics. That's part of stewardship over creation. If we don't have the plasma physics, maybe we look at the sun and we can't understand it because we don't know the plasma physics going on in the sun. All of these things kind of are tied together. So my second commentary is the real threat is the lack of ethical formation or growth. And I'm going to claim with appropriate ethical formation and growth in society, any piece of science could be openly shared. There's no piece of science that is so dangerous that it could not be shared with a person of appropriate virtue. God would not put an aspect of true reality out there which is discoverable that is so toxic and dangerous it would destroy the soul of anyone who encountered it. There's some ability, if you have enough virtue, I claim, to investigate any area of science. And then my final quote from Spesalve is quite a bit longer, and it's about society and trying to control other things in society. So in Spesalve, we're talking about where does hope come from, and there's a criticism about trying to build a perfect utopian society where everything is structured in a certain way, and the problem about this is that we're then denying the freedom of man. So I'll read this. It's a bit of a longer quote. Thus, biblical hope in the kingdom of God has been displaced by hope in the kingdom of man, the hope of a better world. It has also become clear that this hope, so that's the hope in the kingdom of man or the hope of a better world, this hope is opposed to freedom, since human affairs depend in each generation on the free decisions of those concerned. If this freedom were to be taken away as a result of certain conditions or structures, then ultimately this world would not be good, since a world without freedom can by no means be a good world. So my argument here is we cannot build a structure that prohibits the all open sharing of science at all times, because if we did that, we would be removing freedom. So even if we're in Jack's scenario of restricting science, we can't restrict it perpetually forever. We have to leave open the possibility that the virtue of man grows enough so that all of the science can be shared. So that's my thought on that. And then I finally have a longer quote from John Paul II giving an address in Japan and referencing the atomic bombing of Japan. So he says, in the past, it was possible to destroy a village, a town, a region, even a country. Now, it is the whole planet that has come under threat. This fact should finally compel everyone to face a basic moral consideration. From now on, it is only through a conscious choice and through a deliberate policy that humanity can survive. So we see this existential risk for humanity. What is our choice? So now I'll continue with the quote. The moral and political choice that faces us is that of putting all the resources of mind, science, and culture at the service of peace and of the building up of a new society, a society that will succeed in eliminating the causes of fratricidal wars by generously pursuing the total progress of each individual and of all humanity. So the solution is not to restrict the growth of science out of a fear. It's to build a healthy society that will then build up everyone. So it seems like, my interpretation from this address, our goal is to build up society and culture to a point where we can have that sort of sharing. So that's those are my ideas. And then I have a few responses to some ideas from Jack, unless either of my other panelists have a comment. Okay. So Dr. Boyle mentioned the arms race and the problem that if we have an arms race, if one person is engaging in the arms race, then everybody else is going to try to follow them. That's one type of risk of weaponry. Another type of risk of weaponry is that somebody has a weapon that you do not know about and you do not know how to defend yourself from. So it's easy to say that we could, we want to avoid an arms race, but we also want to avoid an ambush. And in order to kind of know what evil could be out there in the world, we should have some level of kind of basic knowledge of what's happening. And then also, I want these decisions to, in a sense, be political decisions by the people. So our restriction on the plasma physics, as an example, if all of us voted for representatives and all of our representatives went to Congress and said, we're declassifying the plasma physics, it's going out there, then it would, we hope it would go out there. So the people in general should have enough scientific knowledge to be able to make those decisions. And so that's something that we only can have, I think, through open science. This idea of, if we try to keep everyone in the dark about a dangerous piece of science, then we're essentially making a moral decision for them about the appropriate way to structure humanity. So people should have some level of understanding so that they can talk to their leaders and make decisions like that.
So you're saying that the solution to the problem of open science is not limiting science, but rather focusing on the ethical formation of a society and of a people so that they have the ability to use it well. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so I think that every person as a scientist makes decisions about what information to share, with other people. So as an example, in my chemistry classes, when I'm teaching about oxidation, and reduction, I tell people that certain chemicals, when you mix, they form dangerous explosives. I don't tell you exactly which chemicals to mix, just in general. But if I was, say, working with someone, a graduate student in a lab or a student in a lab, I would tell them more specifically, like, those two chemicals do not mix in this experiment or something. But there's a general sense in which, the existence of dangerous chemicals, I don't hide from everyone. And I would say, so in my model, kind of each scientist evaluates for themselves what should be shared. And then I think if there's a restriction on open science, it should be placed by a government body and not by a bunch of scientists. And it should be liftable by a government body. That's kind of maybe a secondary thought. But I can't control other people, and I'm not currently in the control of other people. So I don't know what rules I would try to enforce. I think I would, and if we say, like, we don't trust our scientists to be virtuous enough to, that certain pieces of science can't be shared, then we also don't trust our scientists to make decisions about sharing. So it's kind of like, how could we have a rule without trusting the scientists who are going to be, enforcing the rule? So we trust them to some extent to decide who to share with.
I'd just like to respond to that last point quickly, and then we'll throw it out to questions. I'm going to limit myself to 2 minutes. I think the democracy model, like, I like democracy, it seems good, but it's a bad model here because increasingly we're not looking at technologies where voting makes sense. So let me give you an example of what I mean. So we're basically at the point now where if you're willing to spend, I don't know, 5 figures worth, you could make a virus in your garage. We have the technology for that. Now let's say you get on to ChatGPT or whatever and you say, give me a really good virus, and it gives you a really good virus that will wipe out humanity. Now, this is a little bit of an unrealistic scenario biologically, but we're approaching this direction with nanotechnology, et cetera. So you now have this really good virus. It will wipe out humanity if made and released. And probably anybody can make this virus who has, decent technical skills and $50,000 and access to electricity. It's not the case that, if half of the population plus 1 votes that we shouldn't do this, technology is saved. It's the case that every single person in the entire world has to decide not to make this virus for us to survive. If any one person with $50,000 and a garage decides, I'm going to make this virus, everybody dies. Now, again, this is not quite the world we're living in, but it's approaching the world that we're living in. And if super intelligent AI is possible, which I pray it isn't, it's basically the world we're living in. And the fact that, one person has a veto against whatever steps we would make to save humanity suggests to me that, a sort of voting model of well, we should vote on it and then we'll just do it. That sort of works with nuclear weapons because you need to have a state and the powers of a state to make enough nuclear weapons to destroy everyone. It's not clear that that will be true of technologies moving forward.
I'll point out maybe at the very beginning, we had a very small population size of 2, and each of them, had the ability to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and that's a situation that God set up. So God did set up a scenario in which one person could affect the fate of all humanity, and that's the situation that we're already in. We are already in that situation, and in a sense, we've kind of been in that situation from the beginning.
But the mathematics become much worse. So if we say there's a 50% chance, so note that both Adam and Eve decided to
Yes.
do extremely bad things for all the rest of humanity, and we suffer the consequences. So I'm not sure this is really like amazing. But also, if let's say there's a 50% chance of not taking the apple, you have a 25% chance that nobody takes the apple and everything's great. But if you have 1 million people, all of whom have a 50% chance of not taking the apple, then somebody's taking the apple, right? And even if you have 8 billion people and you'd say you would have to be mad, there would be a 1 in a billion chance that you would bake the thing in your garage that kills everyone. Well, the chances are pretty good that on average 8 people are out there making this thing in their garage, right? I'm a little bit nervous, just with population size, gives us more opportunity for lunacy.
Let me just offer a couple of thoughts. I'm wondering, so yes, there's people out there developing bad things, but there's also people out there developing good things at the same time, right? So you have parallel processes happening. And I mean, actually, COVID is actually a pretty good example of this. If the source of it really was Wuhan and the lab, well, then your scenario has already happened, right? But then as it's starting to spread, you have other people who are then going to use science to find an antidote, right, very quickly. And so we have sort of like dual use technologies here. And I'm wondering if we have too much restriction, then we also prevent the antidote, possibly. So I think a good, interesting historical example of this is Fritz Haber, a great chemist, German chemist, who developed the process of synthesizing ammonia. And his invention was so profound that it led to the creation of artificial fertilizers, which has enabled agriculture to feed billions of people ever since. So it's an incredible achievement. However, the same processes, the same techniques that he used for synthesizing ammonia were also used to develop in 1915 the first chemical weapons. And so it was this unbelievable case of like this guy who creates something that can save millions of lives, and he creates something that can kill at least thousands of lives. And it was a personal drama too, because his wife was also a chemist, and she argued with her husband about whether they should continue the research into chemical weapons. He pushed forward, she refused, and later committed suicide after the first chemical weapons were used in 1915 in the Battle of Ypres in the First World War. And the story is that even though he won the Nobel Prize, other scientists refused to shake his hand afterward in protest for what he had done. So it's really interesting. So dual use, too many restrictions could prevent artificial fertilizer from happening because we're afraid of the risk of the chemical weapons.
Yes,
Just a thought.
certainly.
And you're okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I am, so to be clear, like if we go back in time and do my thing, famine and war and plague are back, right? It's bad. There are very serious consequences. We lose a lot of our material wealth and health, but we also lose the ability to obliterate ourselves. And we possibly make it the case that 300 years from now, when in my schema we get to our current technological state, possibly we use it in a more wise way, would be my hope. But I don't know. I guess we should stop filibustering and
Yeah, we want to continue
take
this
questions.
discussion, but we want your input, so we're going to open it up to questions for everybody now.
We have a student question in the back.
Yeah, student question up here.
Student question in the back.
I think you can go, Dan, while the.
Sorry. Okay, I thought I
Well, the
was being
microphones
told to
are-
stop talking. I have a couple things. The first question is, how in the world did you get attendance to be so high?
Well, I offer extra credit to some of my students who came, but I see many faces that I did not offer extra credit, so I can't actually
This is
tell you.
astonishing. We should have you on every week. Yeah, I guess the second question I have is, this is kind of a dirty word that none of you have said. Here I'm going to draw on the work of Nick Bostrom and just say, open science is perfectly compatible with human survival with enough surveillance, right? So you just have an extremely intensive surveillance state watching everyone's every move, and then you can have all the open science you want.
I would say if you did that, then you're going through, one of my quotes was about, from Space Salve, was having a structured world where the outcomes were determined, and that eliminated human freedom and therefore was not good. So I would say if you have a very high surveillance state, you've eliminated human freedom, and that's not good. So that's not the route.
Yeah, Galileo would be a great case of this, who openly shared his observations of the moon and certain pieces of evidence that were supporting the heliocentric theory, and that drew him into conflict with church authorities at the time.
Okay. It's okay.
I have a question for Dr. Sexton.
Okay.
You said that the real threat is doing science without corresponding growth in ethics.
Yes.
But I guess my question is, I sort of live in the world of ethics as a philosophy major, and I get the impression that there are a lot of cases where ethicists are saying, stop, and we just get completely ignored by the scientists. It seems like there's a very significant degree to which the growth in ethics doesn't have any power at all. So I guess, what is your solution to that?
So when I'm saying this kind of growth in ethics, I'm not thinking about some the average ethics of everyone. I'm thinking about the ethics of the science practitioner. So if the ethicist is telling someone to stop, and a good analysis would indicate that they should stop doing that, but they're still doing it, then this indicates that individual doesn't have, the individual who's doing the experiment doesn't have the necessary ethics. And if the society as a whole has not found a way to prevent immoral or dangerous behavior, then the society as a whole is also lacking that ethics. So it's always possible for you to have one person who is lacking ethics, but this really becomes a problem when a lot of people, broadly speaking, are lacking ethics.
Yeah, just to back that up too, I mean, there are actually historical examples of this kind of ethical development happening, particularly through the experience of the Second World War and the Holocaust and the Nuremberg trials, and the kind of ethical standards that emerged out of that to guide experimentation involving human beings and the importance of consent. And so I mean, that to me is a great example of a moral formation happening, very painful one, but nonetheless pretty widespread, and doesn't necessarily have to be just in elites, among the elites, but it's like a cultural shift that I think you're kind of arguing for too. So.
Yeah.
To be clear, I'm also arguing for a cultural shift, just of a different sort, right? Like, I perhaps have less faith in generic society, and I'm not sure I have an incredible amount of faith in the wisdom and probity of scientists either, but it seems like had we gone down this route, it couldn't be worse than what we have now. And there are ways in which, I think I'm maybe more fine than Dr. Sexton in using the structures of society to constrain people's choices. So I mean, I see what you say about we don't want to limit the freedom of future generations. But on the other hand, 400 years ago, someone like me who was comfortably in the middle class, could have bought a slave. And now I cannot do that. I think that's a positive development for society, that I don't even have that choice, right? You have to be incredibly rich and creepy in order to have slaves in America, right? We've really seriously curtailed the sort of people who could even make that choice. That seems like a limitation of freedom with which I'm fine. And I think that sort of some closing off of science would be a limitation of freedom along those lines. There's plenty of freedom to do all sorts of great stuff.
So then only the rich, creepy people get to do dangerous science?
Yes, yes. And that's still better than everyone doing it, in the same way that the fact that weirdos get busted for having slaves in New York every once in a while, does not make the Civil War and the destruction of American race slavery into a bad or inane thing. I mean, but yes, it's still very tragic that the creeps are being creeps. I don't want to minimize that.
I just had a question for you, Dr. Boyle. You said that the creepy guy with only $50,000 could make a virus inside of his garage. But I assume he'd have to spend that $50,000 on some weird stuff. So would it be easier to surveil and limit materials than knowledge?
Probably it's easier, yes. I would think so. Like, certainly, like, I think there's sort of two questions that we've been slightly dancing around, which is I'm coming at this from the perspective of like, what should we have done 400 years ago in terms of like setting up the society and culture of science? And that isn't necessarily like what we should be doing now that like the horse has left the barn. Like, I sort of agree with John Paul, look at me, that like now that we have nuclear weapons, we have no choice but to be very ethical people. But like, I guess I would like to imagine that it seems like we would be in a better world if we had gone down the route where like we didn't need to be perfectly ethical people to not destroy ourselves, where we could give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room to be evil as a society and survive. We don't have that possibility now, but it would have been nice to have that possibility.
Professor Sexton?
Yes.
I very much agree with your thoughts that we have to have an increase of standards with ethics. However, would you also agree that we also have an increase of standards for science? Recent years have shown a growing distrust with the scientific foundation as controversies of journal entries having forged results, people not following proper scientific critique and standards. And so if open science is to continue to be something that can give benefit to our society, the standards of science and some type of regulation to make sure protocols are being followed would also have to occur?
I would say the best way to increase those sorts of standards is to just have the open science in which the bad science can be openly criticized. I don't see another way to do that other than allowing, sort of the criticism. And if the scientists as a whole, if their ethics and development is so poor that they're producing science that's untrustworthy and the people don't trust them, then that might be a motivating factor for them to improve. But I don't think we can easily say these people are going to be the trusted people who are going to enforce good science upon others. I think the best way to do that is to just have openly published science, and then if there are issues, then they can be addressed. Does that answer your question? You can ask for a clarification if that was on.
One question, you've kind of been alluding to this point that open science kind of regulates itself. Kind of what you're saying of like if someone creates a virus, you have people also creating a cure. My question is, when you have all this open science, should there be any sort of regulatory body that stops open science becoming taken by, say, a company or an organization and becoming closed science? Like if someone, like we were talking about the atomic weapons, like there's been these discoveries in open science for the longest time. And then that was all taken by the US government and into closed science to make nuclear weapons, right? So at what point should there be any like stopgap just to either open up that science that's been closed or to stop that science becoming closed in the first place?
I'll say something about that quick. That's a good question. I think maybe, in my opinion, a good analogy maybe is with economics, that I think there's a parallel here that sometimes you need authoritative bodies. It doesn't have to be the government, but it could be other scientific bodies and things who occasionally are intervening actually to help protect access to the open science. Because all the way back to the Republic of Letters and the Renaissance, it wasn't actually open it fully. I mean, women weren't part of it, for example. People who didn't have sort of elite connections didn't have access to it. So if we actually want open science, then I think there is a place for regulatory agencies and powers to actually help protect that.
I'm into that, certainly, as well as a stopgap, I think.
I'm just kind of wondering about, like, you brought up the numbers, like, okay, you only need one person to decide to make a nuclear weapon. but I just kind of would argue that for every one person going into science to try to end the world, like the overwhelming majority of them are trying to find something like the cure to cancer or something like that. And so there's that many more people working against him. Like it's really a 1 to however many competition and arms race.
Yes.
And so it's kind of hard for me to see how the one person will like get so far when so many people are trying to one up him at once.
Yes, so for almost the entirety of the history of science, I would agree with you and say like, this is the slam dunk argument, right? Is precisely that like the good is increasing, the evil is increasing, but as long as the good increases at a faster rate, we can use that to like, you know, ameliorate the evils and be better off than we were before. And that like might still be true moving forward. The problem is there's like a stable state here in the sort of engineering sense of once you get to everybody's dead, there's no ameliorating that because no one's left to do the ameliorating. So if that is a risk, which I tend to think it is, I mean, that's something that is somewhat up, we haven't really debated it, but could also be debated, then the fact that that's there, even if that risk is small, like if the risk of it every year is tiny, you can't really ameliorate it over the long run because there's no bouncing back from it. In this way that you can bounce back from COVID or crop failures or the Black Death if you made a like technological version of the Black Death. You can't bounce back from zero though, which makes the calculations a little bit different.
And another thing that I would point out is that I'm not doing an analysis of balancing, you know, good versus evil. I'm not looking for salvation from progress or from science. So I tend to step back from doing that analysis, even though maybe it seems like a dodge. That I'm saying, you know, salvation from God, not from if we just make the most efficient science choices. You know, that's the best we can do. There's some, you know, aspect of humanity given creation by God, exploration, that I want to respect.
Okay, and then I just had one more kind of worry about like if one like select group had control of like all of the knowledge when it came to this. Like, I feel like if you give it all up to one group, you kind of like can leave yourself victim to like a group think or like them coming up with it'd be easier to infect that group with like the idea to maybe use something for bad, with like infallibility, things like that. And I feel like that I kind of worry about.
I would agree with that,
population
that too, to be clear. I do think that my model is not really that there's like a science UN or something that determines all this. Instead, like there might be, you know, sort of small groups of scientists that work together on, you know, their thing and control access.
Like
and that
medieval
there's
guilds.
sort of, yeah, well, you could think about it as medieval guilds, that sort of thing. So I don't know what the best way of putting into effect closed science would be, but I think there are like, we can explore possibilities that might help reduce some of our nervousness around that. But I think you're right to be worried about a lot of the implementation details here. I would agree with you on that.
So I was contemplating how a lot of our scientists are funded, and that's like government funding, and that's our taxpayer money. So like I saw like a scientific whatever, and it was dogs heart rate accelerate when you hug them, and I was like, that's so great, but how much money was that? How much of my money was that? You know, I think there are technically supervising over it, but it's not actually regulated. Like I don't think the people actually know what our money is funding scientifically, and so I'm like, where I don't know where you could find the openness of that. I would have liked to say, I don't really care what my dog thinks when I hug them. You know what I'm saying?
Very healthy attitude.
So
I would say on scientific papers, this is just a kind of a technical answer. On scientific papers in the acknowledgments, they often say this was funded by a particular grant, and they have the grant number, and you can kind of look up those grant numbers if you want information about what else was done on that, because sometimes people do, you know, multiple things on a grant or something. So that's, you know, at least somewhat trackable in that way. Yeah.
All right, thank you all very much.